Welcome to This Week in South Carolina. I'm Gavin Jackson. This week, we look into a new report about a $1.8 billion fund managed by Treasurer Curtis Loftus, who that money belongs to and where it came from. We asked the treasurer to appear on our show, but he declined our invitation. However, we did speak with Senator Larry Grooms, who is the head of a subcommittee investigating the matter, a subcommittee that Treasurer Loftus testified before earlier this month. Here's part of that testimony now.
As you know, there's a law on the books that says, for accounting purposes, the CG is the complete check upon the treasurer's office. I'm not an expert in the statutes of South Carolina. I'm not a lawyer. But there are very few statutes that are as clear as his office is a complete check upon my office in the realm of accounting. The state treasurer is the state's investment banker. And for the analogies that has been used about the banking and the account balances and whether someone can find, the state's accountant is effectively the retail side of the bank. They're the ones you deal with. When you deposit money, when you want to know how much is in your accounts, that's effectively the part of what the Comptroller General does. The state treasurer, on the other hand, is the investment banker. We do not determine the ownership of funds. At any point in the system, we do not determine the ownership of funds. That is done before the funds come to the bank. The state's money is pooled. We manage pooled funds that are pooled or combined for the investment purposes. We do not invest by agency or agency owner. We only pay the state's obligation after being instructed to do so by the Comptroller General.
Well, I'm trying to figure out why it's taken you 7 years to
because there's probably
try to find out the problems. I mean, what higher priorities has your office had over the last 7 years than to try to fix these unresolved issues?
The Comptroller General is the state's accountant. He is the head of the SCIS oversight team.
But you're a banker.
Yes, sir. And there's not a single problem in the bank.
There's not a single problem.
Not a single problem. The 0993 account is custodied, it is invested, it is reported on every year, and it has been audited.
So this is everybody's problem but yours.
No, sir. We want to work. When Richard Ekstrom called me.
Do you share any responsibility in these problems?
When Richard Ekstrom called me.
Do you share any responsibilities with these problems?
I'm more than happy to share responsibilities. I told my staff the very first day we were told about this, I said, the worst that happens is 4 agencies are involved with conversion that didn't go well. We have to work together. When Richard Ekstrom called me in December to tell me about the 3.5, we had a meeting in my office 3 days later, and it was, what can we do to help, Senator? It was, what can we do to help? We didn't even know about the $1.8 billion. They didn't tell us. Nobody told us. Nobody told us in January, February, March, April, May. We found out at the end of June and July. You didn't find out until October.
But you've known since 2016 and 2017.
Yeah, and so did the CG, and so did the state auditor, and so did SCIS.
And you sat on your hands with your staff.
Well, that's just disingenuous.
Done about it.
That's just disingenuous.
And now you're complaining that your staff had to work thousands of hours on a problem that's existed for more than 10 years, or about 2014.
That's disingenuous. That's disingenuous. It's disingenuous.
I want to make sure that this subcommittee understands what you're saying. There's a pool of money. Nobody knows how many people own it or who owns it, correct? It could be owned by DOT.
Could be.
Could be owned by the federal government.
Could be owned by nobody.
Could be owned by a whole bunch of people that are owed interest. What do you think the federal government's going to do when they find out that the General Assembly's been spending the interest, Mr. Treasurer?
Nothing.
Nothing. They're going to want it back, Mr. Treasurer.
If you know something I don't know, it is incumbent upon you to tell me.
Okay, I'd love to tell you, but you know what? We have to rely on you for that.
Well, Senator, you've made a false construct. You've said that we owe the federal government money. We have no reason to believe we owe the federal government money. You have said we do. That's a false construct.
You have said you don't know. You have said that you don't know. Isn't that a breach of your fiduciary duty to not know who owns that money? That the possibility that that money and the interest thereof cannot be spent, and yet you send it to us every year anyway.
It's a false construct. It's false. Senator, that money exists whether I know who owns it or doesn't own it. It exists. I've got to deal with that. So maybe I should put, because if it's federal, maybe we need to go put it into a non-interest bearing account. You tell me what to do.
Joining me now to give us more insight on this financial situation is Senator Larry Grooms. He's a Republican from Berkeley County and chairs the Senate Finance Constitutional Budget Subcommittee that has been looking into this matter. Senator Grooms, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So we have a lot to talk about, and I want you to kind of give us a nice big overall here about what's going on. Walk us through the discovery of this $1.8 billion, if it exists, and what you and your subcommittee know so far about it.
Well, what happened last year, our former Comptroller General made a statement in front of our Oversight Committee hearing, and we need additional funds to do this, do that. And oh, by the way, we overstated our cash position on our financial records by about $3.5 billion. Thank you for letting me testify. I was like, well, wait a minute, could you repeat that again?
Yeah.
And then we started digging into the comptroller and some of the issues in putting together our state's annual financial package that's used by Wall Street and other investors, is actually used by other state agencies to judge the financial health of our state. And we had overstated the amount of cash that we had by about $3.5 billion. And then we dug into that and found all sorts of other errors. The Comptroller General ended up resigning. We adjourned the legislature, and the governor appointed an interim comptroller named Brian Gaines. Wonderful guy, smart person, been involved in state budgeting. He was a budget director, so he understands state financing. So his job is to put together the ACFR, the Annual Financial Reconciliation. And he begins to report back that he's having issues with our state treasurer with some reporting requirements that the treasurer has. The treasurer's not fulfilling his legal obligations to send the right reports to the comptroller. The comptroller informs the governor. The governor has a word with the treasurer. Hey, you need to actually play ball and send the right reports. It didn't work out too well. The comptroller is still not getting the information that he needs from the treasurer regarding our state's finances. He sends a letter called the Halloween letter to the state treasurer, puts it in writing. We see this fund here. It has what appears to be a $1.8 billion balance. Can you please explain it? And he copied the Senate Finance Committee, and I received a copy of it. And so the first time that I found out that there are $1.8 billion in errors within our state treasury was around November 1st when I received a copy of that letter. We asked staff to start digging into it a little bit more, and our investigation, our committee, our Oversight Committee went back into investigative mode around January. So we've had a months-long, several months of investigations. We've produced thousands and thousands of documents, and we've issued an interim report regarding this $1.8 billion error that resides within our state treasury. That is, our state treasurer is the head of our bank. He's the state's banker. When you go to the bank, you put your money in your savings account, your checking account, and it's the job of the bank to keep track of how much money you have in your account. But your money's not there at the bank. Your money is swept out of your bank account and is invested by your bank. And when the monies that you have on deposit are required, when you write a check, the bank takes those investments and puts the money back into your account. In essence, the bank gives you an IOU, but it keeps track of how much you have. Our treasurer's the same way. There are multiple bank accounts within the state. The treasurer has about $60 billion in investments, a lot of taxpayer money. And he takes those dollars and he invests it to get a return on investment, but he's supposed to keep track of where the monies came from so they can be put back when needed. In 2016, the treasurer lost track of $1.8 billion. We now know, lots of documentation to absolute proof, that actually it was $1.5 billion back in 2016 that he lost track of it. Where does it belong? And instead of trying to fix it, the problem actually got worse. It went from $1.5 billion to $1.8 billion over the next 3 years. The treasurer knew about it, didn't try to fix it, did not ask for help trying to fix it, and what he did is he hid it. He coded it so it could not be visible to others involved with our state's accounting system. And then he sat on it, and he has a duty to disclose financial matters to the General Assembly and to the public, and he failed to do so for 7 years.
Yeah, you were saying 2016, you didn't know about it till last November.
Right.
Claims that this was published, claims that this was publicly viewable, but you're telling us that you all didn't know about it until it was discovered by the new Comptroller General, Brian Gaines.
It was brought to our attention by the new Comptroller General through a letter on October 31st, the Halloween letter of this year.
So, Senator Grims, what's typically the relationship between the Comptroller General's office and the Treasurer's office? Obviously, when we talk about the former Comptroller General, he was there for about 20 years. Treasurer Loftus has been there for about 10 or so years. So there was, I guess, a working relationship, but they're supposed to be somewhat different from each other and a different
The roles are
firewall,
different.
essentially. Yeah.
Yeah, the roles are different. One is the state banker and one's the state accountant. The accountant needs information from the banker, just as any businessman does. You go to get your taxes, get your CPA to file your taxes. You have to provide your banking records to your CPA to make the proper adjustments in the accounts. And similar to the way our state government works, our comptroller is our state's accountant. And he has power to request certain financial documents to make sure he knows how much cash we have, how much is invested, and where it belongs. And he fills out the reports. It's complicated, but it's not that complicated. The banker was withholding some reports. He asked for the reports, and that's how we ended up discovering the $1.8 billion is classified as unresolved banking errors. That's how it resides in a special account, $1.8 billion in an account that should have a zero balance. It's a clearing account, but $1.8 billion on our state's financial records, so it appears that the money, that's where it resides.
So you had the state's accountant with a $3.5 billion overstatement, and then you have the state's banker with a $1.8 billion account. So
The difference is, with the former comptroller, the 1.8, the 3.5 billion overstatement in the state's cash position, it wasn't real money. He was double counting cash. All the cash that was available on our state's institutions of higher learning, Clemson, USC, MUSC, all the cash on their books was counted, but was also counted again. So he was double counting cash. So it appeared that we had more money than what we did. This error is a little bit different. This 1.8 billion could be real money that may or may not be invested. And even under oath in front of the subcommittee, the treasurer said he believes it exists, but it needs to be tested by forensic auditors. Forensic auditors need to come into our state, work with the staff, work with the treasurer to try to uncover the origins of this money, to determine if it's real and what accounts it rightfully belongs.
And Senator Grims, we heard from the treasurer, who we asked to be on this show, who said he declined to be on this show, but he did put a lot of blame also on the CG's office when it comes to the Comptroller General. How come this isn't the Comptroller General's fault if it's the treasurer's situation?
The treasurer is in charge of keeping track of how much belongs in each account. He sweeps the money just like your bank does. Your bank sweeps all the cash out and invests it, and that's how Bank of America makes money. They invest other people's money, but they have to keep track of it. He lost track of the money, not the comptroller who's been on the job for 10 months and 2 weeks. And the error occurred well before Comptroller Gaines took office. The comptroller is the one who alerted the General Assembly to the error. The treasurer has known about the error for 7 years. The treasurer has violated multiple state statutes in his duties. So it is squarely an issue with the Treasury, not with the comptroller.
Do we know if the former Comptroller General knew about this money, Comptroller General Ekstrom?
I don't know if he knew about it, but the system is set up so that the accountant keeps a check on the banker, and the banker keeps a check on the Treasury. State law actually says, and it calls for them to be a check on each other, to keep identical sets of books. In case there's an error in one, they'll let the other know it needs to be resolved. They weren't checking each other, the comptroller and the treasurer. I believe they both knew that there were problems in each other's houses, but they weren't interested in house cleaning. So instead of being a check on each other as the law prescribes, they were in essence being a cloak on each other, hiding the errors from others.
Yes, that's It's a lot to handle right there when we talk about our state's finances. And I want to ask you, when it comes to that, how do you accumulate $1.8 billion for what would be a pass-through account? I know that's what your subcommittee is trying to look into, but do you believe this was being run as someone's personal slush fund? Was this someone's own investment account? What's the read so far as you continue to investigate?
Well, up until 2015, all the cash investments had homes. That is, all the money was spoken for when you where it was supposed to be. And we're talking about a lot of money, about $60 billion on the state treasurer's website. You can read, invest about $60 billion in cash assets. So those are the assets, but he has to have a home for those assets. Part of the home could be, he also invests money on behalf of local governments, the local government fund. That's an investment account that he keeps track of. Some of those investments rightfully belong within the state's retirement system. Some of those monies are federal reimbursement monies. We spend money on roads that are federally eligible or federal highways. We do the work, we get remittance back, federal highway funds. That's a big account he has to manage to keep track of. There are other federally restricted funds, a lot of pass-through money. COVID money, in instance, comes from the federal government. The federal government sends all sorts of monies back to the various states like ours, and it has to be segregated and put in accounts. The treasurer takes those monies, invests those, and makes them available when they're needed as prescribed by law.
So, Senator Grooms, when we talk about that, when you list all these different pots of money, it's not clear, obviously, where this money came from, but it's also not clear that it would easily go back to taxpayers. A lot of people are calling for that money to be refunded. You're saying it's not that easy because we don't even know where it came from.
Well, it's not surplus funds. It's not funds that came into the Treasury that did not have a home. These are monies that were lawfully placed within state agencies, within trust accounts, within the retirement system. That's where those monies rightfully belong. And we have to do the analysis. That's why our subcommittee recommended in the state budget, the House went along with it, we now have $4.2 million to bring in forensic auditing, to bring in a forensic auditing team. We put some more money for additional staff at the Treasurer's Office to be able to assist with the forensic audit. It's going to take them some time. A lot of documentation has to go back into when the treasurer lost track of these funds, where do they rightfully belong? And then we'll decide. If they are surplus funds, then we can make a decision on what to do with those. But under law, they can't be surplus funds. They had already been appropriated. They were within the Treasury, and it was the treasurer's job to keep track of them.
Senator Grooms, in your report, which anyone can read online at the State House website under the Senate Finance tab, you outlined some disturbing events on April 4th that I want you to walk us through, including Treasurer Loftus, who is moving to release sensitive financial data. What would have happened if this data was made public, and why was he moving to make it public?
Well, under testimony, sworn testimony by the state treasurer, he was asked, are you following state law? We were having trouble getting answers over how much monies are invested that are owned by the state in the various bank accounts. There's 26 bank accounts where we know state money existed, where the treasurer had monies. And we're not getting the right answers. And he has a legal obligation to post quarterly the amounts of cash, the total funds within these banks. And he was telling us that law's outdated because when I post it, I'll have to use the exact bank account numbers and other information. And if I were to post that information, it would invite cyber attacks by the Russians and the Chinese. But if you're telling me that I need to post it, I'll post it right now. I'll do it right now. He hands an account booklet over to one of his staffers and says, publish this by the end of the day. And we tell him on April the 2nd, don't do that. We're not telling you to do that. We're asking you if you're following the law. We wanted to know how much cash he said we have in each of our 26 bank accounts. He gives us an aggregate number, but never the individual totals. The math is off. We know it's off by about 1.8 billion, but it could be off more than that. That's what our investigative committee was trying to find out. So he takes this thing a step further. 2 days later, sends a letter, a written communication to us saying that he is posting all the state's sensitive financial records, including bank account numbers and including certain software codes that would enable cyber attackers to take all of our state's money. He was giving them a roadmap called mapping. Cyber attacks would have occurred had the treasurer gone through with that. Our subcommittee had an emergency meeting while the Senate was still in session to discuss the matter. We had officials with the governor's office. The governor was recovering from knee surgery that day. We had the Attorney General on the phone. We had the Department of Administration on the phone. And then we found out from the Department of Administration that at midnight before this, he had sent communications to them asking for a threat assessment in case certain information was released. They were shocked to find out that he himself was the threat. The governor called, personally appealed to him not to do this. It then had to be followed up by a visit from the chief of SLED, Chief Keel, asking him not to do this, explaining there could be legal consequences to you. The governor informs us that he had backed down, and the governor gave us his word that the treasurer was not going to ruin our state financially. That was one of the most irresponsible things I've ever come across in my years of being in state government.
That's a constitutional crisis, it seemed like. I mean, you had the treasurer kind of going rogue, essentially.
It really was.
Yeah.
It really was. And then when it was published in our report, the treasurer denied it and said it was a lie. But then the governor backed up that it did occur.
I think you had a couple of people involved in that situation that could
Yes,
bear
most
witness to
everyone
that, yeah.
involved then said, yeah, it actually occurred.
Senator Grooms, we have less than 5 minutes left, and I want to ask you 3 conclusions of your report. This interim report are that Treasurer Loftus has failed to maintain the integrity of the state's banking and investment records. He has known about the unresolved differences for at least 7 years, and that any suggestion that he did not know about the differences is implausible. So is there any confidence in the treasurer at this point? What can be done to remedy this situation? Is there talk of impeachment? What's the move right now going forward, just based on this interim report?
Well, the governor asked us, our committee was prepared to recommend that he be removed from office. The governor asked us not to do that. There are people, knowledgeable people within the Treasury that can help get to the bottom of this. We need their cooperation. Well, actually, we need the cooperation of the treasurer. Based on his actions up until this point, I'm not hopeful that we'll have that. But the people of the state of South Carolina need to have confidence that their tax dollars are being wisely looked after. And right now, this is incredible. When the banker doesn't know where the $1.8 billion exists, and if it does exist, where it's supposed to be, that's not a small sum of money to lose track of.
Yeah, billion, not million, billion.
Billions.
Even still, yeah.
Billions. And he says that the money is in the right place right now. The money's not in the right place. He's lost track of it, and that's a problem.
And not to mention there was a negative general fund balance last June. That was also concerning too.
The state law says that the general fund cannot have a negative balance. We have information to suggest that on June 30th, at the close of books last year, that the general fund had a negative balance of $474 million. In an interim, in a draft report that was altered before it was published to show that the general fund had a balance of 0. This is a matter we're still looking into. What happened? Why was the report changed? Either investments were sold at a loss to cover that amount, or there was a cover-up, so to speak, to go from a minus 474 million number to a 0 number. Either one's bad. Either one is a failure, but we haven't uncovered the exact origins or the exact cause of that. We're still looking into that one. But yes, the general fund most likely had a negative fund balance in violation of state law.
Which the treasurer is responsible for.
That's correct. That's one of his legally, that's one of his legal charges.
And so we were just talking about that task force, Senator Grooms, and the governor created this task force on April 11th. It's been 2 weeks now. Is it progressing? Are we seeing anything being uncovered at this point? Is the treasurer's office cooperating?
Well, these meetings are at the request of the governor. It's the treasurer and some staff, comptroller general and some staff, the state's auditor and some staff, and the governor's staff. And their first meeting that they had, the governor was hopeful to have full cooperation of the treasurer. He chose not to attend. It's my understanding that they have now had a second meeting, and he was in attendance.
So a lot to unpack there, and something that you would hope that the treasurer's office would be a party to. But Senator Grims, we still have to wait for the entire report to come out. Do we know when that might be happening for your subcommittee?
Right now, we're watching and waiting for any new information that may come out of the governor's task force. We're still going to look into additional unresolved errors within our state's banking and investment system. The bank balances don't match up. What the banks say we have in the bank is different than what our accounting system says we have in our bank. But when you add it all up, the aggregate amount matches. But there are differences that have existed in the banking system now for at least since 2017. And we don't know the origins or why that hasn't been corrected. So there's a mess within many of the accounts within the Treasury. Hopefully this auditing team that will start work here shortly, I believe in July, it's going to take them some time, that they'll be able to get to the bottom of some things and help correct the errors that now exist within the Treasury.
And does Wall Street still have confidence in us in South Carolina, our AAA credit rating?
Our AAA credit rating could be impacted. I hope not. I think it's better that our credit agencies know we're trying to get to the problem instead of them finding out that we knew of a problem and we covered it up.
For South Carolina ETV, I'm Gavin Jackson. Be well, South Carolina.